Welcome to Geopolitics and Diplomacy. I'm Aishwaria, a journalist and counter-militancy analyst for South Asia. And I have with me Danish, an author at the Geopolitics. Today, with the Taliban's uncontested rule in Afghanistan, the militant group is in control of the world's 80% of opium supplies. Me and Danish today will take a comprehensive view of Afghanistan's drug trade and its broader impact in the South Asian region. Now, drug trafficking in Afghanistan has always had a diabolic relationship with militant groups, and there's extensive documentation to prove that the Afghan Taliban are involved in everything from poppy planting to opium extraction and trafficking to running drug labs, charging smuggling fees for shipments abroad. In fact, not just opium. In December 2021, there was a report that claimed that under the Taliban's rule, Afghanistan was also emerging as a prominent producer of crystal meth. To dig deeper, a prominent Taliban leader called Haji Juma Khan was known to be involved in the drug smuggling. The US briefly arrested him in 2001. However, he was released, and years later, an intelligence report claimed that his drug network was directly crucial in funding the Taliban and Al-Qaeda network. And in return, Al-Qaeda provided him with protection for processing plants that convert opium into heroin, and for smugglers who carry drugs into neighboring countries. Many key individuals who are identified essential to the heroin trafficking in the country, like Abdul Ghani Bardar, now hold key cabinet positions in the Taliban administration. Very significantly, the Taliban network goes beyond Afghanistan, and the Taliban has ideologically aligned groups in neighboring countries like Pakistan and Tajikistan, and there are also reports that the Taliban bribe Pakistani forces to smuggle through the southern route. And especially the porous borders of Durand Line enable this cross-border movement of arms, drugs, and militants. Danish, if you could bring us back, take us back and tell us about how did opium become such a massive industry in Afghanistan today?
I think one of the most important aspects that we need to consider here is the history of Afghanistan itself. The fact that conflicts and unstable historical situations in Afghanistan has been a recurrent theme of Afghan history, not just in the recent times, but even when you go back to the 19th century, when Afghanistan was this massive political vacuum right in the middle of two huge empires, the British India in the south and the expansionist Tsarist Russia in the north. Both of these empires were trying to establish a stronghold in Afghanistan so that each could keep the other at bay. And the great game, so to say, the phrase that was immortalized by Rudyard Kipling in his famous novel Kim, the great game was essentially a series of covert operations that was conducted by both these, especially the British forces, British agents, to in a way court the feuding warlords in Afghanistan. The great game, in a way, signifies the kind of fragmented political space that Afghanistan was at that point of time and continues to be. In 1979, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, there was a sort of that period signifies the beginning of perpetual instability in Afghanistan. We saw that after the Soviets left Afghanistan in the late 80s, there was a regular change in power in Afghanistan, and therefore there was no occasion when not for a very long time did we have a viable central authority in Afghanistan, which reduced the whole political space into a fragmented political region full of turmoil, full of internecine conflicts among warlords. So that is the political aspect. What do we do how do these warlords derive revenue out of this whole conundrum, whole political chaos? They rely on the most convenient way out. They rely on opium trade. Opium agriculturally is suited to Afghanistan as a crop. It is a very robust crop. It is suited to the drought conditions of Afghanistan. It has a very short growing season. It has a lucrative international market. If 1 kg of wheat gets you, say, 20 cents in the market, the same quantity of opium gets you around $250 to $350. So quite clearly a lucrative market. Therefore, no wonder that the acreage under opium has been expanding over the years. And over a period of time, we saw a strongly entrenched ecosystem of opium, not just the farmers, but also the merchants and sometimes the feuding warlords themselves. And so much so that even while the US and the NATO forces were in Afghanistan, they steered clear of this ecosystem. They did not want to create, unnecessary hostility by trying to disturb this ecosystem. So because of course opium was an important source of revenue for the feuding warlords. They used it to buy weapons, from missiles to even tanks, machine guns, to tactically outmaneuver their rivals in the region. So even the US, in fact, from 2001 to 2014, in these 14 to 15 years, there has been an increase in Afghan opium production by 35 times rather than a decrease. So quite clearly, NATO and the US did not play their part. They allowed it to continue. So yeah, it is a very well entrenched ecosystem that has been established due to a number of inherent factors: political, geographical, economical. Of course, there is a lucrative market available for opium, not just within Afghanistan, but even around the whole region. So over a period of time, we see that opium becomes a prominent source of revenue. Today, as it stands, Afghanistan has 50% of national income is believed to come. 50% of Afghanistan national income is believed to come from opium, and it is now a source of 85% of opium that is used for heroin production globally. 85%, massive chunk of the opium that is used in the heroin industry. So quite clearly, things are very grim, and it is going to have implications not just for Afghanistan but also the surrounding regions, South Asia, Central Asia. And this is something that all of the stakeholders have to come together and try and address and try and rebuild Afghanistan, its economy, so that the reliance on opium is removed and the resources are channelized to more productive areas. So, yeah.
Like you mentioned that it's the entire opium trade and the drug smuggling is going to have an impact on the region. We're actually seeing that happen already in Jammu and Kashmir, where narco-terrorism has not been a new phenomenon, but Taliban-aligned groups like the Lashkar-e-Taiba and Hizbul Mujahideen have definitely begun increasing their funding acquired from the drug trade to continue their operations against Delhi and Jammu and Kashmir. In recent raids, security officials have recovered large consignments of narcotics with militants, and this actually marks a shift as to how there's a shift of how heroin is now being directly transported across the line of control as militants infiltrate from across the border. Pulwama and Shopian districts in South Kashmir and Srinagar remain at the center of the narco terror racket in the Kashmir Valley. Ironically, South Kashmir and Srinagar also happen to be the militancy hotspots in Jammu and Kashmir. Simultaneously, of course, the same thing is happening in Pakistan with the Tehrik-e-Taliban and even the Baloch separatist insurgents now heavily indulging in the drug trade. You mentioned how the drug trade has an impact politically and economically. It's very interesting because for the Afghan society to ideologically accept opium or the production and cultivation of opium. It goes back to the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda under Osama bin Laden. Now, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda had to justify the production of opium, which is forbidden by the Quran. So they built a narrative around how the narcotics trade would lead to higher addiction among Western youth. And there was a narrative peddled that the opium, it was peddled that opium was acceptable only because it was consumed in the West. A US intelligence report had actually claimed that Al-Qaeda was trying to develop a high-strength form of heroin that it planned to export to the US and West Europe. Now there have been reports of the Taliban cracking down on domestic addiction. We saw reports, we saw international news channels reporting how there was a heavy crackdown, especially between October to January. But there's absolutely no news on the Taliban trying to control opium production domestically. So the trade's still going on. In fact, everything that used to happen in secrecy now, there are open markets where opium is sold. However, foreign journalists are restricted and usually not allowed to access these areas. Now that we know what's happening in Afghanistan, could you point out the most prominent transportation routes and what regions are the most susceptible to this entire smuggling?
I think it is very important for us to consider the logistics and the transportation of the whole opium trade. The reason that Afghanistan is so close geographically in such a close proximity to both India and Pakistan, both the countries are extremely vulnerable. The transportation is it is very interesting to note the fact that for Afghanistan, the closest port to actually push the opium into the global industry, into the global market across across the Pacific, across the Indian Ocean, both towards the west as well as the east, is the Karachi port. Karachi acts as an entry port for Afghan opium to be exported to the rest of the world. And therefore, while opium is the opium is flowing south towards Karachi, there's a lot of consumption within Pakistan as well. All along the whole supply chain, there is a lot of consumption, and by the time it reaches Karachi, it actually spreads out its tentacles within Pakistan. For India, the two most susceptible areas have been the states of Punjab. We know for a very long time, Punjab has been struggling with a serious heroin problem, a serious opium problem, and in the recent times we are looking at J&K as being upcoming hotspot for opium consumption. In the recent times, the local police have actually reported crimes and ascribing them to a drug-related problem. These crimes range from theft to violence against women, or other similar crimes that the police ascribes. In fact, 31% of the under trials in prison across J&K right now are believed to be involved in drug-related crimes. So I think quite clearly it is these are very vulnerable areas. The fact that they are very close to the border, these are extremely vulnerable, and they are also. These areas have also been earmarked as being highly vulnerable by the government of India in their official reports. The fact that both of India and Pakistan are in close proximity means they have a very serious, they have a very high vulnerability to the opium. Now, what is the biggest challenge? The biggest challenge is the fact that we know for a fact that drug peddling is an international problem. Drug trafficking is an international problem, and a lot of international groupings, like for instance the ASEAN, they have found ways to tackle the problem by coordinating amongst each other. The police actually coordinates amongst each other across the borders all throughout the whole grouping. NAFTA had for a very, very long time tried to control the drug peddling between Mexico and United States in a coordinated way. But that is completely out of the picture here because of the fact that we do not really have conducive ties with Pakistan. India, there's a complete it's a blind spot between India and Pakistan. So that option is completely out of the picture, and that makes the situation all the more dangerous. The fact that India and Pakistan cannot coordinate on a governmental level or on an international level. To be able to control, to be able to curb this problem that is facing both the countries. And a lot of parameters, a lot of human development indicators are very similar in both these countries. They're essentially South Asian nations. They are developing countries, both of them. So the vulnerabilities are quite similar for both their societies. And yet they are, because of the kind of unique political situation, the unique geopolitical situation that they find themselves in, there's very little they can do about planning a coordinated action against the whole opium menace that is flowing in from Afghanistan right now.
There's in fact a real concern in the world that obviously right now with the Taliban trying to seek international legitimacy, it's still very calculative of its footing in the international community. But the group is very much capable of exploiting state institutions now that it's in control of it. It controls the Central Bank of India. It controls the national airline. So there's a real possibility that in the future, they might be able to issue diplomatic clearances for aircraft to transit through airspaces. They also conduct regional transport routes. So I understand when you say that, despite Taliban's alliance or close relations with Pakistan, I don't see an end to this. I think the only other non-state actor that the Taliban, that somebody could challenge was the Islamic State branch of the Khorasan province, or the ISKP as we know. The Islamic State's Afghan arm has long opposed the drug trade. When the group was actually was in control of the bordering Nangarhar province with Pakistan, it was known to clear poppy fields and arrest smugglers, and it blocked Taliban's trafficking routes into Pakistan. Well, the Islamic State and Taliban have ideologically differing views on a lot of things, but essentially both the groups view each other as strategic rivals in the region. So even though the Islamic State looks down upon the Taliban and has often used it as propaganda because of the group's nationalistic interests, which is restricted to Afghanistan, as opposed to the Islamic State's global ambitions. ISKP has always accused Taliban for having relations with Pakistan or negotiating with the US. So the Islamic State's opposition to the narcotics trade in the wider context has been more strategic than an ideological one. And considering that Islamic State has few cells operating across the country and it does not control any region, Taliban essentially has absolutely no opposition or conflict to this drug trade. So it's quite an interesting and frightening situation for the region.
Right. So I think the fact that we now see these are still early days to predict how Taliban is going to go about handling the whole situation. We know for a fact that this opium industry is strongly entrenched. It has been there for a very long time. And Afghanistan, Taliban coming to power in the recent times, although I did read up a couple of news articles about Afghanistan, about Taliban trying to clamp down, wanting to clamp down, trying to build a policy around, trying to clamp down on the opium trade. But again, I think it is all about the kind of ecosystem that has already been built, that has already reached the deepest levels of the Afghan society. The market is extremely well established, not just in Afghanistan or even in the surrounding regions. It goes as far as Europe. It goes as far as North America and even Canada. Even the deepest parts of the Southeast Asian nations, which are really thriving economies. These are very lucrative markets. These are very with very high income customer groups. These are markets that Afghanistan is not likely to lose in the coming years, and Taliban might have a vision. I'm not aware. They might have a vision, but I think it is very difficult for them to touch the ecosystem that has already been established. The local ecosystem, especially, which has farmers right at the middle, and then surrounded by the merchants, the local warlords now who have been converted now into politicians. All of them have a very important stake in this booming industry, as I can safely call it now, given the fact that it contributes so much to their national income. So I think it is in the coming years it will be quite interesting to see how things pan out. But at this point of time, I don't really see Taliban doing changing anything overnight. I think the pattern will continue. What is required is a sort of an effort, like I already said, sort of an effort to shift the reliance of Afghanistan's economy from a convenient opium industry, a convenient option of opium trade and farming, to a more productive, to a more export-oriented sort of an economy. I think that is the only way to go about it, which will take a lot of time, which will take a lot of rebuilding of infrastructure, a lot of rebuilding of communities. So it is something that I do not foresee in the near future, but over a period of time, let's hope it does happen. Of course, we see a lot of there's a huge blind spot when it comes to diplomacy now that US is out of Afghanistan. Very little interference that can come in from the outside world. So that is a bit of a concern, and will continue to be a bit of a concern in the coming few years, I think.
Absolutely, Danish. To just conclude with a very small point was that it'll be very interesting to see how security forces on both sides of the border in India and Pakistan deal with this, because there's been a lot of drug smuggling through unmanned aerial vehicles across the border in Jammu and Kashmir, and with the Taliban and Islamabad fighting over the building of the Durand line, which Afghanistan has never really recognized. So it'll be very interesting to see how the security forces tackle this new challenge of drug smuggling from terrorism.
I think it is all the more risky for countries like India and Pakistan because of the fact that these are developing countries which have a very huge chunk of, in fact, 350 million is the number of adolescents that South Asia is home to, and adolescents, mind you, are the most susceptible to opium, to these drugs. And in the recent years, if the Punjab experience was to teach us anything, it shows that the age of the addicts is going down increasingly. It is going down to as young as 12 to 13 years, which is very worrisome for both India and Pakistan. A huge proportion of their population is very young adolescents who are expected to go into the workforce tomorrow. Both India and Pakistan are dedicating tremendous amount of resources to education, tremendous amount of resources to their nutrition, to a lot of healthcare and education infrastructure. But all of that could go down the drain. In India, we talk about the demographic dividend, but I think the whole demographic dividend could be diffused if this problem is not addressed. It's a huge risk for the region. It's a silent epidemic. The fact that there is a lot of social stigma associated with it, even if we have it in our own families, we never would speak up, given the kind of the kind of cultural stigma that is associated with the problem, and therefore it continues to be a silent epidemic. We're just coming out of a massive pandemic, but I think this could be another serious challenge that our countries are going to face. The characteristic feature of developing economies is that there's very little there's very little dedication of resources to checks and balances, to administration, which can be very useful in curbing this menace. And that will be a huge problem. Corruption is a massive problem in our administration and police systems, which could be a big challenge to overcome in the coming years. So I think for us as developing economies, for us as young economies, for us as young societies, I think it is a massive risk, and it's a challenge it is going to be a very formidable challenge for our governments, for our societies to cope with.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Danish.